On this episode of Scammer Stories, this one was hard. The scam victims' emotions were still very raw, and I had to take breaks actually while editing to kind of gather myself. You'll hear right away that the interview was difficult for him, and I want to give him a big thank you for coming up with the strength to share his story to help others. Now, this story starts out with a man who was recently widowed, which typical, right? But this one is a little different. The scammers found him another way. Not a dating app, not Facebook. His scammer spent night and day with him on the phone, and what he went through is shocking. We'll call him Jerry. I'll let him start.
I was happily married to my wife for 14 years, and last January, my wife, Mary, got sick, so I took her to the hospital against her wishes, and they found a mass in her brain, and after brain surgery and a fall out of bed. And
doctors were busy trying to figure out what was wrong and ended up finding that she had a fungus on her brain. It was all very sudden and very traumatic for Jerry. His wife ended up passing away.
March 20th of 24. Of course, I took it very hard. I wasn't expecting, she was what I thought was very healthy and things like that. But God has a plan, so he took her home.
Did you ever figure out what the cause of the fungus was?
I had her at two different hospitals, and they were trying to figure it out. And she got pneumonia, and she passed away. But I believe it was contributed to diabetes, because she tried to do it naturally, and her diabetes numbers were pretty high. I begged her to take her medicine, but I talked to some doctors, and they said that, brain fungus could be caused by, diabetes out of control and all that. So
you really went through it, huh?
I was mourning my wife.
Jerry was trying to recover from the horrific experience with his wife, who he loved very much, and every single day was hard. After spending day after day at his wife's gravesite, he'd try to carry on his day job. Meanwhile, trying to figure out how to move on without her.
I'm a Christian, so I believe, that she's in heaven with the Lord, but I still gave me peace to be at the cemetery, and I would be there 3 or 4 times a week. And that's pretty much me. I've been working at an oil refinery for 43 years.
In the midst of all the weight of the world, Jerry got a message from a friend who needed help. Maybe he needed someone to lift up for his own mental health, but it ended up opening a world of hurt.
And a friend of mine, he needed $1,000 pretty quick, and I was trying to send it to him, and instead of like using Western Union and things like that charges enormous fee, I said, well, I use Apple Cash, so how about if I try Apple Cash? So he gave me his account number or whatever it is, and I wired $500 Apple Cash.
He was at his wife's grave site when he got a message that started this whole ball rolling.
I was actually at the cemetery when I got this notice from Apple. It said that, your Apple Cash was rejected, and it was sent back to my account. It said it'll take a day or two to show up, and I tried one more time, and then the next time it sent it back again, So I said, well, this is ridiculous. The first mistake I made was I was at the cemetery, and instead of going to like Apple's website or anything like that, I looked up Apple. I have an iPhone, so I Safari'd Apple Cash customer service, and it gave me an 805 number, which is in California. So I proceeded to call that number, and a woman answered, and she said, good morning, I'm Daisy from Apple. How can I help you?
He didn't know that he had a scammer on the other end of the line. I mean, he called her, right?
And that's the beginning of my horror story. She asked for my name, and I gave her my name, and then she said, well, let me check, and she came back and she said, you have a red mark next to your account or something. You've been hacked, and your identity theft has been compromised. And I said, oh, really? And I said, well, what do I do now? And she said, well, since it happened with you trying to, send Apple Cash and all that, Apple's responsible for fixing this. So she said, are you in Newark, Delaware, or are you in Houston, Texas? And I said, no, I'm in Delaware. She said, well, your hackers are in Texas. So I said, well, what do I do now? And she fed me this line like, well, your hackers have been buying gift cards in your name. Long story short, like, when I look at it now, I see how stupid it was. I mean, I was scared to death. I'd never been identity theft before or anything, So she had me go around to all these stores, different stores in Delaware. And she actually told me the store to go to. She said, go to first store she sent me was to a Dollar General, and she said try to get as much Apple cards as you can get. I think they let me buy like 1,000. I ended up going around like most of the night and a little bit the next day.
Wait, they let you buy 1,000 Apple cards at Dollar General?
No, I'm sorry, $1,000 worth of Apple.
Okay,
I'm
gotcha.
sorry, 1,000.
Okay.
She had sent me to Food Line. It's a grocery store in Delaware. There was a Kohl's with she said they were using Kohl's, and then she sent me to Acme, which is another grocery store, to buy Nordstrom. And I believe it was a test to see if I was going to follow her orders, and I was so scared I didn't. And I was 3 months from losing my wife, and I really didn't. I really wasn't thinking straight,
Oh,
So I
yeah.
said,
What was her reasoning for you buying the gift cards?
she said that my hackers were purchasing these gift cards, and I had to offset. If they spent 3,000 at Nordstrom, I had to buy 3,000 worth of Nordstrom card. I didn't understand it. She told me, she said, just don't worry about it, that you'll be reimbursed for all this. She told me she works directly with the FBI and an Apple complex in San Jose, California, is where she told me she meets with FBI every night at a certain time, like 8 o'clock at night. That was the stupid reason she gave me, and I believed it, because I was scared, and I went around buying these things, and she said I would be reimbursed, so I figured, well, I'll get money back anyway. So I believe I spent somewhere around $6,000 to $7,000 in these gift cards, my money. She told me after day one that I was running around buying these gift cards, and she said the FBI wants me to monitor your phone 24 hours. So she was tied into my phone for, all day, all night. If I needed to talk to her about something, I would just say, hey, Daisy. And she would say, I'm here.
Now, that's the first time I've heard this. I know scammers would keep victims up messaging all night, but this?
And then she kept telling me that, she has to check my security, make sure that, I'm secure before I go into my house and before I go to work. And I bought into all of it. In the meantime, like 2 or 3 days into this, she said, well, we need to protect all your funds. She said, what do you have, bank accounts or whatever? And I said, no. I said, my wife and I were invested in gold and silver and a little bit of crypto, so.
Looking back, that was another mistake. Never tell scammers where your money is hidden.
She said, okay. And then in the meantime, we were, like I said, we were talking. We were, she would talk to me till about 8 o'clock at night. And then she said she had to go to a meeting with the feds, so, and then she was going all night. But if I needed her in the middle of the night or something, I could just say her name and she would answer. So in the meantime, we got talking about each other, like she said, what are you doing now? And I would say, I'm at the cemetery or I'm just sitting in my chair.
He eventually tried to get some information out of her. He asked if she was in India.
She said, no, I'm from the Philippines. And I know she had used the Filipino card, because my wife who passed away was a Filipino, that I married. And she knew how much I adored my wife and, that I just lost her. I told her, we got talking about personal stuff, how I cared for my wife and I loved holding hands and cuddling and all this kind of stuff, And then, so when I asked her if she was Indian, she said she was from the Philippines. And she said, my mom and dad still live in Manila. I have a sister that lives with them and then 2 brothers in Canada. And, I told her about my sons and my grandchildren and stuff. And we started getting, pretty chummy, after about a week or so, talking and things like that. And she acted like she cared for me.
So we're going to jump forward a bit. These stories have so many details. I like to let the victims tell their stories in their order.
Just a side note, like I recently, because I have detectives and FBI and stuff working on the case, they subpoenaed phone records that I gave and all that. And they finally got the records back, and she's Indian. So I was right. She is an Indian and she's in India. They're pursuing. I don't know if they can find, if they'll be able to find her or track her down or anything. And that's my prayer that they do. But anyway, back to the story. We started talking all the time, and then she would start this thing with, she said, like she said she was a vegetarian, and she said, would you like to learn some vegetarian dishes? And I put on a lot of weight from eating hospital food and stuff with my wife and going out to eat all the time. So I figured, it would do me good to lose a little weight, So she was, she would have me cut up vegetables, and then I would send her pictures and she would look at it. Now, I never seen this woman, and to this day, I have no clue what she looks like. She told me that, she could not disclose herself to me because it puts her at risk. She said, I've been shot at before, and things like that, and she would scare me with stuff like that. So I would back down, because I tried numerous times. I said, just send me stuff in the mail, or something, what you look like. She gave me this Filipino actress that people tell her she looked like and things like that. But I was never allowed to see her. And I had no clue my case was going to go on 7 months like it did, but I thought it would be like a 2 or 3 month thing. And she told me they would go after my hackers. And then once they put them behind bars, she would close my case. She said I would do like 2 days of paperwork, which would give you all the information where my gold and silver was at, and give me gift card money back and things like that.
The scammer kept digging for more information on his financial situation, and he opened up on his retirement.
I worked for my company for 43 years, so I had 3 different pensions, and we decided I could take a lump sum. So I took the lump sum, cashed it out, and put it into a gold and silver, and we stored it at a facility in Delaware, close by where I live, So I told her that those funds in the armory, and she said, "Well, you need to call Equity Trust, which was my the people that were managing the funds." And she said, "Start the process of getting your gold and silver, so the feds can put it in a safe storage locker." Is what she said. And I said, "It can't be any more secure than where it is. It's in an armory." I said, "The place is cameras all around it. There's guards." I said, "How would my hackers ever get a hold of that?" She had all this crap she threw at me, like, "Your gold and silver will be useless because, they'll take over." I don't even remember. It was so stupid, but I just wasn't thinking straight. And
by this time, she'd wrapped his emotions into it, and he started to have a little flutter of hope.
By this time, I was like, we were kind of liking each other, you know what I mean? So I was like, I was believing what she said. And so I called my Equity Trust, and I actually went to the armory, and they counted everything out for me and loaded it in my truck. And I went home, that day with $780,000. I lost over $1 million in this deal, 1,200,000 probably.
I know this is shocking, but Jerry had a good wife that he relied on. I do the same with my husband. He says his wife always took care of the finances and even saved him from the IRS scam.
I'm not a good money manager. And when you fall for these romance scams, like this Daisy pretended to be a Filipino. She said she was 38. And I said, "Well, you're a little young," because I said, "I'm 67. And age is just a number." And she could see my picture. I could send her anything I wanted to. I just wasn't allowed to see her, So she was like, "Oh, you're a good looking guy. And I don't care about the age. I just want somebody like you that will take care of me, hold my hand." She said her husband, she was married for 2 years to a guy and lived in Canada, and the guy beat her up and things like that, So she played the love angle with Filipino, and I fell for it. And so I brought that gold and silver home, and then she said the feds, she called them the feds, but she meant the FBI, had to design a safe storage and a central bank and close by where I live, which she claimed was in Maryland or something. And she said, as soon as they get the safe locker, that, I'll send people out to pick up the gold and all that. So then the day came, and she told me that, there would be a Fed agent, that would be coming by my house and would pick up the metals, So she said he's going to say a secret word like 4 federals or something like that. So she would be on the phone with me the whole time, and she said, there should be a gray SUV, in front of your house right now, and let me know when you see them. And their guy pulled up. They never came out of the car, for obvious reasons, because they didn't want to be filmed with all my cameras and all that, and so they stayed in their car. She said, okay, go out to their vehicle. So I went out to the vehicle, and he'd roll down the window a little bit. He'd say, for federals. And then I said, okay. And then he'd pop his trunk or something. And I loaded $780,000 worth of my metals to India, which I thought was going to a safe locker, but it went to India or wherever their racket is. I mean, if she's in India, then, which the policeman told me, the detective, and they have a big ring, because people came to my house 4 times. That's not the only. After she got all that gold and silver, she went after about 100,000 in crypto that I had. She said we need to protect that. And then my wife had an account, and it had about 80,000 of gold and silver in that. So I had to get that. And then once I got that, they wired the money to my bank, and then she would send me to my bank and get a wire transfer. I would buy like a couple blocks of gold with that money from JM Bullion, it's called, and then she would send the agents out to pick it up. When I purchased that. So
I wonder if the people that came to your house were actually money mules, were scam victims themselves.
they were Middle Eastern guys for the
Okay.
most part. It was like four different cars, 4 different guys that came
Okay.
in.
So maybe
wasn't
not.
the, it wasn't the same person, and she would always stay on the line, and your gut tells you, and probably the Lord was telling me. I know the Lord was telling me that you're doing something stupid here, but I did it anyway because I was in love, and I just had a bad feeling, like as soon as especially after the big transaction, 780,000, I was like, oh my God, and she would send me in the house and said, sit down and relax. So she wanted to make sure I didn't take any pictures of the vehicle or anything like that, and so as soon as I loaded the metals, the guy would take off, and she would say, go back in your house and sit in your chair and just relax, and we'll talk when you get in there, and then she would say, I'm watching the progress, I'm monitoring the guy, and I'll let you know when he gets to the bank and deposits the metals and all that. And I believe it was in late October, early November. Going back a little bit to my original story, like I said, she monitored my phone 24 hours a day for almost 4 months, before they stopped, and like I said, she was always there on the line. If the line dropped, she would call me back and say, we got disconnected, and all that. And then she would, so if I ever needed to talk to her, I just say her name. And so in the meantime, we would talk all throughout the day. Like if I was at work, I'd say, hey, Daisy, I'm at my lunch, and we would talk for like a half hour. And we started getting close, and she started telling me how much she really cared for me, and she wanted to come to Delaware and be with me. Once my case is closed, she'll resign her position and all that. So every night we would cook together, and she would teach me how to cook a dish, and after I ate, she would be there on the line, and she said, well, I'm going to do some paperwork while you're eating, and then let me know when you're done, and we'll listen to some music together. So we sat there and listened to music, and she would give me like a couple songs she liked, and I would play it, and then I would give her some music that I listened to. And I mean, it was like a corny thing, but it was like I was falling for her, and I wasn't, honestly, I swear I was not looking for love, you know what I mean? But it just happened, and it wasn't because she was young or anything, because I'm really not crazy about 38-year-old person, but she said she didn't care about my age and all that kind of stuff. I said it's a love scam, and she told me that she would close my case, and then she would resign and be with me. So that's what I believed in the whole time. And so then in late October, early November, she had talked to me one day. I was on my way home from work. She said, when you get home, she said, I need to talk to you about something. And I said, all right. So when I got home, she said, just sit in your chair and relax. So that's what I did. And then she said, Joe, the Fed said that your truck Now, when my wife passed away, we had like three vehicles, but they're all like 20 years old, and I had come across, I had invested in this health system for my wife. She wanted this system, but it would take like a year to get it. It's called the EE system, and it was like $80,000, and I took some money, like 40,000, I had to put down on it. So when she passed away, I called the company and I said, "Look, I don't want that system." So they sent me a check for like 40,000, and I said, "You know what? I haven't had a nice vehicle for a long, long time, So I took that money and bought a Honda Ridgeline, a used one. It was a 23, but it was the nicest vehicle I ever owned in my life, and I adored that truck. I just looked forward to getting in it and driving somewhere with it. And she knew it, and so anyway, she said this day in November, she said, your VIN number of your truck is tied in with the hackers. And she said, if they do anything malicious, you're going to be, your truck's going to be tied in with them. And, we're going to have to get rid of your truck. I freaked out, and I was like, no effing way am I going to get rid of my truck, and all that. And I mean, it took her 3 days of bargaining with me. And she even talked about my house. She even said, your house, might be another thing. And I said, Daisy, I said, look, you got my truck, you got my metals and all that. I said, this game stops right here. This house, my wife and I bought it 3 years ago. And I said, it's got so many memories and it's got her written all over it. I said, there's no way that I'm getting rid of my house. I said, I'm done if this is if you keep insisting on that, And so she backed down on the house, but she got my truck. She made me take it to this place. It's called we buy used vehicles or something like that. And I took a beat on the truck, because I paid like 40 for it, and I ended up getting like 27,000 for it, But she said all that'll be reimbursed, and you can get a brand new truck after I come to live with you and all that stuff. She said, you just have to do this, because this is one of the last steps, that we need to do to protect you and all that. And so after like 3 days, I did the deal with the truck, and then she said, "Look, she said it's like 27,000." So she said, "Go to the bank, get them to give you the cash, and then we're going to invest in Bitcoin, and I'll manage your Bitcoin until your case is closed." And I went to the bank, got the 27,000 in hundreds, and then she sent me to this tobacco store where I ended up putting 27,000 worth of $100 bills into this Bitcoin machine, and I supposedly owned a Bitcoin. She said, I'll take care of your Bitcoin. She said, don't worry, it'll grow and it'll be fine, So I did that, and then the last thing that I'll talk about was, that she said, you have a retirement. And I said, well, my company, I work for, 9 different companies. I mean, it's the same place I work, but 9 different owners. So I had like 3 different pensions. The refinery shut down in 2009, and then we opened back up in 2011 and hired me back, So I had this active pension that started in 2011, and it was about 160,000 that was accumulated by the time she mentioned about that, and this was in December, and I said, look, Daisy, I said, you got enough stuff. Don't worry about it. I'm not worried about that. Just close my case. She said, we have to protect that money. That's our future, and all that. I said, well, I can't get the money. I have to be retired. And she said, well, you were talking you were going to retire and everything. And I said, yeah, but I'm not ready to retire yet. I said, I still want to go back to work, because I didn't tell you, but in June I had knee surgery. I needed a knee replacement, and I was supposed to do it the previous year, but Mary got sick, and I put it off. So after she passed away, I had a knee replacement, and then I also had a bad hip. So while I was sitting around recovering in June, August 24th is when this Apple thing happened, and I ended up calling her. So I was still out on disability. So I went back to work. She said, we need to protect that funds. And she said, after we get that and get it protected, and turned into gold, I'll close your case, send you the paperwork, and then we'll be together. You can come to San Jose and pick me up, and then I'll come back to Delaware with you. And so I believed all that stuff. And I said, well, I'm not really ready to retire. And she kind of forced me. I mean, I made the decision, so I can only blame myself, But I ended up retiring December 6th so I could get this money to give to her, and I was out on disability, and it finally got wired into my account. After the money was in there, she had me turn it into gold. We went to the bank, and I wired money to JM Bullion, bought 2 blocks of gold for 133,000, and then after the gold came in, they came and picked it up. Same, type of deal with the feds and all that. And then I said, "When's your last day of work?" And she said, "Today's my last day, of work." And she said, "I just finished your paperwork. I'll be sending that to you." So the paperwork was supposedly, the combination and stuff to the locker, the place where my funds were at, and so that I could access it. It also was a reimbursement for the Bitcoin and for the gift cards that I had spent and all that. Plus, she told me every day that they monitor my phone, that they would pay me $200 and things like that, So all this paperwork was supposed to come to me, and she was supposed to resign. She said, "Monday I'll be back to my apartment," because she said she worked at an Apple complex with the feds. She stayed there. She had a cabin there, and she would stay there. She also had an apartment that Apple supplied, and she would go back to her apartment. And she said she would go back to the apartment. She would FaceTime with me, give me her personal cell phone number. She said she could just fly to Delaware, but I decided I wanted to go pick her up, be there and greet her and bring her back to Delaware with me. So that Monday, she said she would be there about noontime. And I got all dressed up, because I never seen her before. So I got, I put on a shirt and a tie, and, I just wanted to look nice for her. I waited around for like 6 hours. I kept texting her, "When are you going to come?" And all that. And then that day she didn't show up. The Monday she said she was in trouble with the feds because, I put myself at risk, and I put, my coworkers at risk and all that stuff. So I don't know what's going to happen. And, so of course I was all upset and worried for her. She said, "That's okay. I'll be all right. I'll get through this." And she said, "I plan on going to my apartment tomorrow," which would have been Tuesday, and I'll meet with you Tuesday and we'll talk and all that. So Tuesday morning, I get this text that says there's 2 police jeeps in front of their place. And she said, "I really caused a mess." And, that was it. She never showed up. After that, I kept texting her, never answered back. I tried calling the number, and the number went right to like voicemail.
So how did you figure out it was a scam? What made you realize it and stop?
For 2 days where she promised to be there, and then she didn't show up. And then she stopped texting me. I mean, I sent a barrage for 3 or 4 hours. I sent text after text after text, "Where were you at? I thought you're coming." And there was nothing, no reply or nothing, which was unusual because she always replied back to me, and there was nothing, So at that point, I said, "You know what? I think I've been scammed."
So then, is that when you went to police, and what's going on with that?
So that day that I realized I got scammed, one thing I forgot to tell you too was she had me lie to everybody. Like I lied to my sister. My sister and I we're very close. We lost our parents years ago, and both of us, and she knew about this Daisy, but she didn't like the fact that I couldn't see her and all that. She said, "Joe, I'm sorry, but I'm suspicious." She said, "Are you sure your money's okay?" And so I would lie. I lied to my sister constantly. She said, "Please just tell me your money's safe." And I would say, "Yeah, everything's safe. I just checked my account this morning and all that," which I knew it wasn't, And then, my sons, I have 2 grown sons, and they questioned me, and all that. And I said, they asked me about my truck. She told me to tell them that, had some issues with the motor or something like that, and, I lied to them. I lied to my coworkers. They were suspicious, just by the way I was acting and talking, things like that. Her monitoring my phone. They said, "Joe, this doesn't sound right. Are you sure? You sure she's not a scammer?" And I was like, "No, she's the real deal." I lied to so many people, and to the point now where my son's just like, "Dad, I don't know what to believe anymore. You lied to us so much." But that day, I realized I was scammed. I started looking up. I was going to buy tickets to California to go find her. To that address she gave me. So I was working on flight tickets and things like that, and thank God my sister called, and she said, "I just calling to see, did you and Daisy connect today?" And I just bust out crying, and I said, "Sis, I've I've been lying to you the whole time. I said, I hate to tell you, but I think I think I was scammed, everything, all my money. And she said, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I'm getting ready to buy a ticket to California. And she's like, Joe, she said, stop. She said, no, please. She's probably not in California. She's probably somewhere else, but she said, even if she was, she said, if you find the people, they're going to gun you down or something, she said, if you track them down and all that. She said, so I want you to go to the police and report this thing. And I was like, no, I have to go, She said, please, do what I said. So I listened to her, and I went to the Delaware State Police and filed a report that night, told them the story. And then right now I have detectives working with me, and FBI have called me, and
That's great. You've gotten way farther than a lot of the victims I speak to. They don't, police haven't listened to them, and the FBI doesn't get involved. That's great.
yeah, thank you. And I even hired a private investigator, but he really couldn't do too much. He's a retired policeman and all that, but he was trying to, find some stuff out for me also. But they're still working on it. They had to subpoena the phone records. There isn't much to go on because I'd never seen the woman, so they don't have any pictures. I was in like shock for a month. I didn't know what to do. I was like, how do I, what do, I just lost my retirement, like, I mean, everything I worked for 43 years, and I was like, what do I do, and then, so I didn't really, I have a church family and my pastor and all that, we've been praying and things like that, but I mean, my church family rallies around me. But I called the Attorney General's office, and this was like a couple weeks ago, and there's like an online thing you do, and I basically typed in this whole story I just told you, and it supposedly goes to like the FBI and things like that. And the Attorney General is like supposed to be a pretty powerful figure in the state, so they're aware of it. And then my bank, the bank manager called me, and she said she talked to the back office, and they want me to fill out a CI3, I think it is, form. It's called, I forgot the exact name, but I did that. It was, telling them all the different amount of funds that I lost, and then, the story. I had to, type in the story again, like I just told you, and I'm also seeing a grief counselor. My oldest son said, Dad, you need to talk to somebody, because he said that's not normal, that you gave away your whole money to a complete stranger, and he said it just doesn't seem normal. He said, you need help, so I've been seeing this guy, and he's been a help. I don't expect that I'll get any of my money back, because the detective told me, he said, I hate to tell you, but they probably melted your metals down and it's gone, But he said, I said, if anything, I would love to see her behind bars, so she can't hurt anybody else like she hurt me,
Yeah, that would give you some satisfaction.
It would, yeah, it really would.
Now,
So
what did the therapist say? Any revelations there that could help other people?
he's trying to convince me, he's trying to tell me that I'm not stupid, because I've called myself every name in the book, stupid, idiot, like just moron, everything. And he said, look, you were mourning your wife and somebody took advantage of you, and he said, it happens. He's trying to get me to forgive myself, and I'm having a hard time doing that, but he said that's the, first step in trying to recover. And I mean, my sister treats me like nothing ever happened, like she's just so awesome, but
Yeah, you got a great sister.
I do. I really do. Because, the day I told her I got scammed, she didn't say, you lied to me about, all this stuff. She just said, please don't go to California. You need to go talk to the police right now. Please do that. Please. She just begged me. And I said, all right, I'll do that.
And see, when my mom told me, I told her, you lied to me. That's the first thing I said.
She lied too?
Oh, yes, a lot.
Yeah.
Did you feel guilty when you were lying to your son?
Oh, yeah, I felt terrible. I mean, my coworkers, they could see in my face. Actually, I found out a few months ago, after I retired, one one of the guys called me and he said, I know you don't know this, but he said Josh, which is one of the guys' names. He was ex-military, and he said he was scared to death. He could tell that something wasn't right, So he called like, he got a hold of like local politicians and stuff in Delaware, and told them, he said, I'm working with this guy and I believe he's being scammed, and all that. And he says not, but I believe he's being scammed. And he said, Josh never heard a word. I had a nice, comfortable life, and I gave it all away.
Do you still have the house?
I still have the house, yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Whew, you've really been through it. I'm so sorry.
I still have the house as long as the IRS doesn't come after me.
This story may seem shocking if you've just tuned into the podcast for the first time, but it's not unusual. It's heartbreaking every time I interview a victim. If there is a silver lining in this story, it's that he realized what was happening and can now start to rebuild his life. For most victims, that's not the case. So, in other news, after I got home from testifying before Congress, I heard from a couple of the senators with follow-up questions. I sent back ideas that I posted on the Scammer Stories Facebook page. And we have some exciting things happening with advocating against romance scammers that I'll be sharing soon. We're in the planning stages now for the next trip to D.C. to talk with lawmakers. I love hanging out with the other board members because we're all so different, but we all get along so well, and everyone has a ball in between the meetings. So I really look forward to these trips. I'll have more on that coming up. In the meantime, if you'd like to connect with me, you can always email me at scammerstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, Scammer Warriors.